arrested. I'm in a police station. Pretty serious at the moment.
Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not.
He created this alter ego, and when he started doing Stonies, he'd only wear masks. He didn't want people to see his face.
He always said that he'd be the first artist to sell a piece for $1 billion. I mean, nobody knows when they're going to die, but probably subconsciously, he maybe thought he didn't have a long life. He always said, the one thing you can't buy is time.
Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not.
I am Oscar Russo. I am Stony's son. I think the Stony story would begin with my dad's childhood and how he grew up. He was born in Luton, and when he was 4 years old, he moved back to Sicily. So his parents were both working a lot, so they sent him back there to live with his grandparents. The town where they're from, Ribera, is very quiet, kind of not much happens there. So he would spend all of his time when he was 4 or 5 years old just sitting on his doorstep, looking out to the other houses and just drawing them on a notepad and doodling and things like that. So I think that's where his painting and love for drawing and art really started, was out there just out of boredom. So his dad came over on a boat. So they had boats going to New York, they had boats going to Canada, and just by chance they went to Southampton. He worked in a brick factory for 2 to 3 years just to be able to earn his freedom to live in the country. We've always described him as a very Del Boy kind of character from Only Fools and Horses. You know, hustling every day, different schemes, just making money out of anything he possibly can. Which I think my dad learnt a lot from, on how to work and how to work hard. So once he'd done his few years working in the brick factory, he went back to Sicily to find a wife, because they were very old fashioned back then. And he met my nonna, my dad's mum, and they got married 2 weeks after they met. They went back to England when he was 14, and he didn't speak any English. You know, he was quite fat, ginger hair, a lot of freckles, very pale, and he got bullied quite a lot in school. He had a very tough time. He found it hard to make friends. He didn't speak the language, and we found out as well that he's dyslexic as well, so he was also quite slow in learning, so that didn't help at all. As he was growing up, he was a bit of a troublemaker, so when he was 15 he just stopped going to school, and he'd go to the local golf course in Luton, I think it was Stockwood, and they'd have a little lake on the golf course, and people would hit their golf balls and you go in the water and you lose it. So he'd go in the morning, pick out all the golf balls, and then he'd go to the front and sell them for cheaper what the golf course was selling them for. And after 2-3 years, he'd had just massive piles of cash that he just earned selling golf balls. He always worked in restaurants, so his dad had fish and chip shops, cafes. They'd always had restaurants in the family. So when my dad was about 21, he had about 16 restaurants in like food courts around England, like in Lakeside and things like that. He was making a deal with the company that runs a ferry between England and France about doing the catering for the ferries, and he had like American style, like TGI Friday kind of restaurants called Capone's. And then when I was about a year old, we opened Oscar's Pizza in Kings Langley, which is still going now. So it's 26 years he's been doing that one. But he always said of everything he did, Oscar's was like his main thing that he's always really proud of, because it's the type of thing he'd always wanted to do.
On Oscar's Pizza, here I am with my boy, and we're making pizzas.
Oscar's was named after me, yeah. I've been working there for 11 years. And when he got diagnosed, I told him I'd run the restaurant for him, because he wasn't able to work like he used to and hustle like he always would. So I said I'd take it over for him. And so for the last 3.5 years, I've been running it for him now. I find it really important to carry on the legacy that he started, because he worked so hard to build what he's built. And he always said that everything he's done is to leave for his kids to be able to live a great life. So I feel like it's part of what I need to do to carry on his legacy.
So I'm Sally. I have many roles for Stony. His assistant, his salesperson, his partner, and eventually I was his carer. My relationship with him started off as selling his art, but just as an art consultant in a gallery. But I left the gallery to work solely for Tony. And I did that for about 2 years before he was diagnosed. I did become his partner during that time. And then when he was diagnosed, I still carried on selling his art, and that was our passion, and that's what we loved to do. So we did carry on doing that, but more towards the end of his illness, probably the last sort of 8 months, I was a full-time carer for him. My story with Tony began probably 2014. Well, me and my boss at the time met him at an art show in Birmingham. We were both quite hungover, huge sunglasses. She was like, let's just do this one last aisle before we go. And I was like, no, we need to go. But we did that one last aisle, and that's where we met him. So I think everything's meant to be. So we were meant to go down that aisle, and we were meant to meet him. I mean, his art's obviously quite loud, quite crazy, but we were just very taken by him, just him as a person, his character. So I think we were on his stand for about an hour, just talking to him, not even about art, just life. We both had quite similar interests. Obviously, I came from a restaurant background, and I was passionate about art. And same for him. Obviously, he had his established restaurant, and he was a passionate artist. So we had quite a lot in common. He had a very infectious personality. I mean, if anyone met him, you know, they get sucked in straight away.
Ciao, stiamo andando al mare. Come stai? Siamo qui a Timbirossi. Woohoo!
But I think his upbringing made him quite real, because he came from nothing. So I think when you have nothing, it sort of grounds you a bit more. He was just a nice, real guy, and quite easy to get on with.
His dream was to be in Formula 1 and race for Ferrari, 100%. His career in racing started, his brother-in-law was married to his older sister. He was a racer. He'd race in go-karts and stuff like that, and he took Dad to Silverstone one day. I think he must have been about 19, 20 years old, that he just fell in love with the racing. His dad put enough money to buy him a go-kart, so he used to go go-karting, and then eventually made it through to Formula 3, Formula 3000, which is now Formula 2 is the equivalent.
Over time, chronic anger will shape your emotions, and
He raced with people like Damon Hill, Johnny Herbert, Mark Blundell, Paul Spooner. Their biggest problem with the racing was the money you'd have to raise to be able to keep going, and because they weren't a wealthy family, his dad would be hustling, and they mortgaged their house to try and fund his racing career. And he, at one point in Formula 3000, he had a really big crash. He flipped the car, it was on fire, and he broke a few vertebrae. And they were saying, like, you'll be lucky if you ever walk again, kind of thing. But that was the end of his racing career. That's where it unfortunately stopped. He always said he didn't have any regrets about the things he did in his life and how he lived, but one thing he would regret is that he would never got into Formula 1. He would have done that for the rest of his life. He's a very big personality, very charismatic, big smile, always laughing. He was extremely ambitious and really impatient. Like, if he wanted to do something, he would have to have it straight away. He'd have to learn how to do it straight away. He played golf for a lot of his life, and he got really good at golf, and he started playing off like a 5-6 handicap after a few years. And then he played snooker. He was really good at snooker. He built a snooker room. Every Wednesday, him and his friends used to come. They'd play snooker, they'd play poker, and they'd be up till 3-4 in the morning just messing about, drinking, gambling. And he met Ronnie O'Sullivan last year, just over a year ago, and he's been to the house. They played snooker together on the table, and it was really nice because he really looked up to him. Like, he's one of his favourite sportsmen. And they became really good friends, actually. He wanted to box, so he learned how to box, and he was winning fights after a few months of training. Just anything he wanted to do. Music, he became a music producer, he had his own record label. He's got a music studio where he would make his music. Worked with all kinds of artists. He met Kanye West when he was first starting in Chicago. At the same time, he met Lupe Fiasco, and he worked with Usher as well. So I was about 10 years old when he started doing that. He would just be up all night. You could hear like electric drums in the background while you're trying to sleep, waking up the whole house.
Use Insta, use Tinder, use Insta, use Tinder, use Insta.
always said he didn't like to sleep because he didn't want to miss out on living life and doing what he could. Whatever he did, he just did it better than anyone else could.
Obviously, he's Sicilian Italian, so quite a big family man. Lots of friends, lots of family. So a very welcoming party house, as people said. But because he has his art studio, music studio, poker room, snooker room, all on the sort of same grounds as his house, not really a lot of reason for him to leave, to be honest. He had all of his hobbies and would spend a lot of his days just in his studio or in his kitchen. So he loved to cook, loved to eat, which is nice. Especially now we walk around each area and he is very present in the house, especially obviously in his studio, in the living room where he painted towards the end of his life. He would wake up every day and say, you know, I can't have a good day gone bad. He had to have a good day every day. I think when he lost his dad especially, it gave him sort of a wake-up call to live every day like it's your last. I mean, nobody knows when they're going to die, but probably subconsciously he maybe thought he didn't have a long life. Tony was massively inspired by other street artists. So, you know, being the character that he was, the daredevil that he was, it wasn't just canvas that he painted on. So he'd get up super early, go out, graffiti the streets, get arrested, you know, fined.
At the moment, I've been arrested. I'm in a police station in Ribera because I was doing graffitiing and I look pretty serious at the moment.
But yeah, he'd graffiti the streets because he wanted people to know who he was.
So it was about 2010, I'd say, he really started the journey as an artist. I remember he started painting more and more, and he'd go out and buy canvases and just like house paint from B&Q and stuff and use that to paint on the canvases. And yeah, he'd lock himself into the kitchen for like days at a time, just painting and practicing and finding a style for him that he really enjoyed. So he would he set up an easel in the corner, close the door, put the easel, and he would, same thing what he's done in here, except it's a kitchen. It's got all the cabinets, it's got sink, coffee machine, sugar pots, everything like that. It's just splattered with paint everywhere, and he just didn't care. He actually liked it better like that. So when he started painting, he was Antonio Russo. He did very abstract, lots of bright colours, very animated, like lots of music-inspired art, he called it. And after a few years of doing that, he created this alter ego. And when he started doing STONY, he'd only wear masks. He didn't want people to see his face. I think it was from being shy about people seeing his art. Because when he first started doing his abstract art, even I think for the first 6 months, we weren't allowed in just to look at the art at all. So where I'm sitting is where he used to paint all of his paintings. So he'd hang up his little hooks, he'd hang up the canvases on there, and he'd just start throwing paint at the walls.
He got that ambition, baby. Look at his eyes. This week he mopping floors, next week is the fries. So stick by his side.
So it's literally 8 years, 4 hours a day most days, or sometimes longer, 12 hours, just throwing paint at a wall, literally. It's like its own painting. It's not like the backdrop where he's behind where he's painted, it's the painting itself. His art was very much his diary. It's almost like therapy for him. When you look at his paintings, you just see what he was thinking when he was painting it. It's so off the top of his head. And there was sometimes he'd paint at night because he didn't want to sleep, and we'd come down in the morning and look at it, and he would say, I look at the painting, it's like I didn't paint it, because I don't remember what it was I was painting. I was just moving. We've been going through quite a few, like what paintings he's left us, just seeing what's there, and it's quite cathartic just reading what he's written and how he was feeling. It's nice. There's a lot of things we look and we laugh, and it's funny what he writes, and then there's some things it's like, oh, like he was feeling like that. Like if he'd write something like "fuck Boris," you know, Boris has done something that day that he's just got pissed off at, and he's written it on a painting. So it brings back a lot of memories. There was one painting he did. Me and my fiance had watched a documentary on SeaWorld. He was always obsessed with SeaWorld and Shamu when we were kids, and he'd loved it. And we watched this documentary, it came out a couple of years ago, about how they treated all the whales and everything, and it was horrible. And we told him to watch it, and he watched it, and he was so devastated. He did a painting about it with loads of sayings like Shamu's dead, like stuff like that. Every time I look at that, it just reminds me of when we were sitting around the table talking.
I was present a lot when he painted. Not in the beginning, but as we got obviously closer, I'd help him mix paints, move the canvases for him, and I would just sit. Most of the time, I played DJ because obviously he painted to music, so I'd put on music for him. When he painted, very obviously mood driven. He was inspired by himself. You know, what he's feeling that day, what he's been through that day, the past week, who he's spoken to, who's upset him, who's made him happy. And then that would obviously reflect in the music that he was listening to. Which is actually really nice, especially with the Stonys, because he's wrote a lot of personal, sort of deep stuff on the paintings. Because I was present, it's quite nice that I know sort of where that painting's come from, sort of what he was inspired by, what he was feeling that day. He not liked being sad, but he embraced being sad. And I think because his canvases were his outlet of how he felt. So him listening to music helped him sort of get out what he felt and put it onto the canvas. His music goes perfectly with his Stony art. If you listen, it's very weird, it's quite quirky, quite out there. You know, it says a lot of stuff people probably wouldn't say. So it goes perfectly alongside his Stony art.
There is a fly genuinely behind me. You got it. Killed the fly. So my name's James Ryan. I first got in contact with Stony 2 or 3 years or so ago now. We actually had a conversation over the phone initially, and I gave him a bit of an understanding on my dad, because my dad was also going through something fairly similar to Stony at the time. My dad had a tumour in his lung, and we were talking about, you know, just life in general. There was, even talking to you now, I can get the hairs, you know, on my arms and back of my neck, because we had so many similarities, but it was beyond art, really and truly. There was just a connection that we had, that's where it started. Eventually, I came to his house, got to experience, you know, up close and personal, the magic behind, you know, the man, the artist, the person that is Stony. So something that not just myself, but everyone seems to pick up on here when you come to, you know, Stony's house, is just how much energy there is. All in all, you just feel some kind of purpose being here. I can remember the very first time I discovered the Stony Instagram page. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was sprawled out on my sofa, and anyone that knows me well would say that my attention isn't the best, my biggest trait, let's say, my biggest asset. And my kids, I remember trying to get my attention. I was a bit like, out the way, because I was just captivated by the words, the emotion. It struck me a lot, you know, where there was similarities between Basquiat and Stony, but also as I started to delve deeper into the true meaning, I was just captivated, and that was probably me done for a number of hours. And I thank my lucky stars that I was on my sofa that day, being quite a lazy sod, and going through that page.
We moved here about 14 years ago, and the house itself is like 400-500 years old, the original part. So it's a very old house. We gutted it all out, and he built it exactly how he wanted it. So he was going through a divorce with my mum, and he had a lot going through his head, and he was saying, like, I just want to do something. like, I need to do something. I was like, well, why don't you repaint the house or something? And he was like, oh, okay, I'll go paint the house. I was like, no, don't paint the house. So he got off the phone and he spent the whole day just literally painting stonies all over his house. And he sent me a video after he did it. I was like, I can't believe you just painted your whole house like that. So he literally did it all in one afternoon. He's just off the top of his head, spur of the moment, just like all of his paintings. Basically his house is one big stony now. He's just got sayings everywhere and drawings, and every time you walk past it, it's just like you feel him around you everywhere.
Love a commodity. Love a commodity. Love a commodity. Love a commodity.
It's my opinion that the man of the crowd,
He was never officially diagnosed with autism. It wasn't until we went to see his oncologist for the first time when he was diagnosed with his brain tumour that his oncologist said, so when were you diagnosed with autism? Obviously I thought that, the kids had thought that, but just hearing it from a professional was obviously like, okay, yeah, he is autistic. So going on his journey with him, it might not be a result of a situation, but you do have very emotional highs and very emotional lows. But yeah, very, very obsessive, a lot of OCD, but a lot of energy. And I think that also relates to the not sleeping. But I think all of that comes out in his art and makes him a great artist. With the low moods, before his diagnosis, he was quite expressive, not with words, but just with sort of anger, I'd say. But after his surgery, it was purely, he'd express himself purely with his art. So he did come quite introvert, struggled to put into words how he felt, which is why the Stony stuff's very important to us now, because that was the only outlet that he had after he was diagnosed where he could explain how he felt. First
of all, I like his art for myself. I've got, one of his pieces now at my property. So I have a passion for what he's created, the actual words. A lot of it is referencing music, R&B. I think what's fair to say is what differentiated Stony to our existing, stable of artists, if you would like to say it that way, is the fact that it was just totally out there. All feelings, all thoughts, he left nothing behind. It was all on canvas, and there was really no fucks given. Whether people liked or disliked, he was true to himself and his identity, and he wasn't pigeonholed or wouldn't allow himself to be told. And again, you have to admire that, where someone really knows, their true purpose and they have their vision, and they won't sell their soul, essentially. So yeah, for me, the art was raw. There were swear words, on there. Some galleries would think, absolutely not going to have that in the gallery. Don't want to offend anybody. But, listen, a swear word's a swear word. Who cares? And that was his mindset. So for me, I was like, I can relate to somebody who is real. There's no necessarily airs and graces. What you see is what you get. And I can work with people like that, with other artists at times, helping them, nurture them, guide them. There was very much the complete reversal. It was more a case of, Stony was actually telling me and guiding me and informing me on what his journey was and what he did and didn't want to do. So yeah, that was a new experience for me, challenging at times, but equally because I knew how successful he had been, in all walks of life. I knew that, that there needed to be a bit of give and take. So we first talked about putting on a big show in London, either at our gallery space or a larger space to do justice to his story. We talked about doing a show abroad as well. He had plans to go out to the States and over to Dubai, but it was always due to his condition. It was always quite limiting to fully engage and go ahead with a plan. And I know he was really frustrated with that. It just mattered that I was doing some kind of justice, for him continuing his legacy, essentially. I moved in here just before he got diagnosed with his brain tumour in 2019. He took the news surprisingly well, actually. His oncologist, a lot of our family thought that he was in denial.
But that was just the person that he was. You know, he accepted it straight away. When he had his brain operation to remove the tumour, you always run the risk of brain damage. So when he came out of his first operation, he seemed the same, but his oncologist sort of said to him, as time goes on, you live in anxiety, and because you've been given basically a death sentence, the longer you live, the more anxious you'll be, because you think, well, I'm living on borrowed time. So I think when he was first diagnosed, he thought, yeah, I can beat this, I can do this. But when he got to the 18-month sort of point that they gave him, his prognosis, I think anything after that for him was very scary and very unknown. And it was the first time, he's done a painting about it. He for the first time, he had self-doubt. And he used to say that to us a lot. It was the first time he'd ever doubted himself. And he wasn't used to that. He wasn't someone that suffered with anxiety or, was worried, can I do this, can I do this? He knew he could do everything. But this was the first thing that he had ever thought, maybe I can't beat this. When Tony was diagnosed, it was probably the first time I saw him vulnerable. He was always the strong character, the person for reassurance. If you had any doubt, he would support you, or any problem, he would find a solution. That time in his diagnosis where he was his most vulnerable was really quite hard, just because it changed his whole being, his whole personality, his whole character, and that was quite hard to see.
What really got me was Stony's vision and the fact that he had had so many people reach out to him initially via social media, particularly during the lockdown, where they could relate to his struggles and his anxiety, the fact that he was autistic, he was dyslexic. His work went very much beyond art, purely because of his upbringing, his background, the failures, the success stories. His story wasn't went to a certain school, had a certain type of art education. It was very much self-taught. That's where I could relate, and that's where I think a lot of people can relate now. If you had a drive, a determination, a purpose, you could make anything happen. His vision was just to take that global, and that's something, without a shadow of a doubt, we will be doing.
Our 8.5-year relationship was very up and down, and we did have quite a period where we weren't together. So the Stonies that he created during that period, I was able obviously to come back and sort of read them and see, what he was feeling at that time. So I suppose they are quite significant, because it lets me know how he was feeling when I wasn't here, when I wasn't present with him, which is quite nice, because he did find it hard to tell me how he felt. And why we weren't together wasn't always clear. We're two big personalities and we just butted heads. Yeah. There's a particular Stony piece, it's called She Was So Beautiful. And that actually started off as a beautiful portrait of his ex-wife. And for whatever reason, their relationship sort of started to hit some rocks, I suppose. And he turned that into the first Stony. And he always said that he'd be the first artist to sell a piece for $1 billion. And that is the piece. The quite significant pieces to him were pieces of his family. I think family members reading those will know who it's about. But I think, like I said, because he had trouble in expressing himself, I think those pieces in particular are quite special to him, because obviously family was a big thing to him. And when certain things happened in his life with his family, and pieces would come of that, I think that is quite significant to his story, but to his family and, well, now his children. I mean, he changed drastically after his second surgery, which was January 2021. And he became very tormented, very paranoid. And you'll see that in his art. His art changed quite drastically. In 2006, his dad was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, which is the same rare brain tumour that Tony was diagnosed with, not hereditary, not genetic. And he passed away 18 months later in 2007. I don't know what the likelihood or the percentages are, but Tony's oncologist said that he's been in the game for 25 years and he'd never had or operated on a father and son before. The brain tumour that they had is quite rare and can grow up to 2% in one day. So it's a very aggressive brain tumour. He always fought so hard, even to the detriment of his own self. He always said, I'm going to be the longest survivor. I'm going to be the first person to do double chemo. I'm going to be the first person to do double chemo and radio at the same time. And obviously there's rules of that because, you're more likely to die if you do stuff like that. But he was always like, no, I'm going to be the first person to do everything. And he got quite sick, I say in the January of 2022, and he probably should have passed away in the February, just going on what the doctors have said, what his oncologist said, but he powered through till the June. He became paralysed down his left side, and eventually he was paralysed down his right side. Couldn't speak properly, couldn't hold a pen, so couldn't do his art anymore. But in the June, he got really sick and went into palliative care. I kept him here at the house. So obviously I was his full-time carer, but I kept him here. He didn't want to go into a hospice, so we had him here at the house. And in his final days, he was put on something called a syringe driver, which basically pushes whatever medication, so steroids or anti-seizure, but also morphine, just pushes it slowly into your body, just so you have sort of a constant, top up of any painkiller. But as some people would know, syringe drivers, not great news. You have that normally in your last 5 days. So he had his first syringe driver fitted, the next day a second one, and then the third day a third syringe driver. And the nurses said, we've never seen 3 syringe drivers in one person. What he had in his first couple of days should have knocked out a small town. So we're not sure what else we can do. And he was still awake, obviously not moving around, but, struggling in pain. And I said, please just sedate him, because he's still fighting. Even now, he can't move, he can't speak. So they sedated him, and then 12 hours later, he passed away.
I think I want people to know how great of a dad he was, and how caring he was, and how he lived 5 lives in a space of less than a lifetime, because he died at 57. So just to know how driven and inspiring of a person he was.
A couple of weeks before he died, his GP came around and said to him, what is your greatest thing you've ever done? What is your biggest achievement? And he said, my kids. And he cried when he said it. So I think, with all of the things that he's done, all of the great lives he's led, racing driver, artist, DJ, being a parent was his biggest achievement. What was also very important to him since 2007, when his dad died, is raising money and awareness for the brain tumour charity. And it's great that people raise money for cancer all the time, but because brains are a lot, they're more rare, I suppose. So not a lot of funding goes towards clinical trials to find medicines and cures for that. So that was one thing he was very passionate about, is not just money, but awareness for the charity. Well, the future, I think, is great. I hope we can carry on doing what Tony wanted to do. I think what we want to do is pick up where he left off, or pick up where me and him left off. He already is, but he wants to be a famous household artist. You know, he wants to be the first artist to sell a piece for $1 billion. You know, and that's what we want to do. And I think that's amazing, because, you know, people come and go, pass through this life and don't make a stamp on this world, but he's making a huge stamp, and I think everyone will know and appreciate his art, and I hope we can carry on his legacy, and I think he would be really proud of what we're doing.
Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not. Sounds are happening all of the time, whether we want them to or not.
I'm